Welcome to the 2030 webinar series. This is a 10th installment, an in-depth look at the payment request form. The agenda for today consists of going over what the session is about. We'll be going over the payment request form, specifically what is a payment request, and the form layout. We'll also be going over BearBuy resources and support, and then lastly, questions and answers. This session is intended for all users. It's only 30 minutes long, with the first 15 minutes going over the payment request form, and the last 15 minutes solely dedicated to questions and answers. Now let's get started. So what is the payment request form? The payment request form is used to process payment for activities that do not require a purchase order. Each activity type has different documentation requirements, which must be scanned and attached to the payment request form. All payment requests, when submitted and after being reviewed by the requisition creator, are routed to a requisition org node approver to review and approve. So in BearBuy, when you navigate to the payment request form, this is how the form will appear. Some fields are required to be entered in order to continue the transaction approval process. These fields are noted by bolded text. We're going to look at these fields a little bit closer in the next couple slides. So going back to what a payment request is, only certain activity types can be processed on this form. Not all payments should be made using the payment request form. The payment request form should only be used for specific types of transactions. So here's a list of what should be paid using the payment request form. All these activity types are also listed out on the actual form in BearBuy. So from this list, I will point out a couple of these activity types just because they are specific to the transaction. For instance, entertainment, paying for catering invoices, should be paid via the payment request form. This excludes any caterers that are listed within the America to Go catalog. If your department currently uses the America to Go catalog, if the caterer is listed in America to Go, please use the America to Go catalog. Do not use this form. So for instance, my department, Supply Chain Management, has visibility and is using the America to Go catalog. If I need to pay Yali's for a catering order that I place, I will not use this form. Instead, I will just use the America to Go catalog. If your department currently does not have visibility and is not using the America to Go catalog, please continue paying catering invoices only on this payment request form. Another one I want to point out is reimbursements. Reimbursements to UC employees and students is allowed on this form, but it should not contain any entertainment or travel expenses. If a reimbursement contains any entertainment and or travel expenses, that reimbursement cannot be made via this payment request form. Instead, it needs to be made via the travel and entertainment system. So in other words, not in BearBuy. The last activity type that I do want to just go over a bit is the telephone and data services. Telephone and data services is specific to mobile devices that are used for work purposes. This does not include any on-campus telephones. If you need to order or pay for any on-campus telephone lines, you'll have to contact IST. Again, all these activity types have specific required supporting documents that must be attached on these forms in order for them to be processed and paid. To view a list of all the required documents for all these activity types, please visit the URL listed in front of you. If a purchase order should have been set up but was not, payment for the invoice should be processed using the after-the-fact form, not the payment request form. All transactions other than payment request form transactions should not be paid via the payment request form. Some of these examples are payments to photographers, florists, and other individuals besides sports officials, any personal entertainment and/or travel reimbursements, printing, card rentals, subawards, contract expenses, services, and so on. Again, personal travel and entertainment reimbursements should be processed via the travel and entertainment system, and all these other transactions should be processed on the after-the-fact form, not the payment request form. If any of these transactions are improperly placed on the payment request form, there is a very high chance that they will be returned to the shopper unpaid, and the department will have to resubmit these transactions using the after-the-fact form in BearBuy instead. So now let's look at the payment request form layout. The form is comprised of three main sections. They are the supplier payee information section, the payment request item section, and the payment and handling details section. Now we're just going to look at each of these sections a little bit more and explain each field within them. Let's begin with the supplier payee info section. The first required field is the supplier name. So in this field, enter the name of the supplier or individual needing to be paid. If the supplier does not have a BFS supplier number, the supplier will require vendor setup in BFS. The vendor setup process differs based on departments, so for more information on which process your department follows, please contact your manager. Shoppers should select Supplier Not Found if the supplier name is not found in the system. Shoppers will also select Supplier Not Found for payment to staff, faculty, and students, as shoppers do not have access to view staff, faculty, and student names. So if Supplier Not Found is selected as a supplier name, you'll then have to enter the suggested supplier information below. So in this section, you'll have to enter the payee's name. If the individual is a UC Berkeley employee or student, you'll also have to enter their employee or student ID number. And then below it, if it is a supplier, enter the suggested contact email and/or phone. Now let's enter the payment request item section. So in this section, you'll be entering all the detail related to what needs to be paid. The first is the item description, unit price, and quantity. You'll have to enter the line item details for the payment in question. Enter the line item description, unit price of amount, and the quantity. You should only use one payment request form to pay one invoice. You cannot pay multiple invoices on the payment request form, even though they all relate to one supplier. You should use one form per invoice per supplier. The next field you need to select is the activity type. You'll have to select the appropriate activity type from the drop-down menu. Selecting the appropriate activity type is really crucial, as it determines the required documents to be attached. Next is the internal payment notes section. This section is not required to be completed, but if you want to add additional notes, you could do so here. You're able to enter any notes related to the payment that you wish to maintain for record-keeping purposes. Information in this section is not sent to accounts payable or the payee. This is just for your record-keeping purposes only. The last section on the payment request form is the payment and handling details section. This is a section where you'll enter the invoice number. If you have a supplier invoice, enter the actual supplier invoice number. You could enter up to 17 characters. If you do not have an invoice from a supplier, you can leave the section blank. Accounts payable will enter a unique invoice number in this field. So instances where you will not have an invoice from a supplier are when you're processing a refund, a reimbursement, paying for visa fees, and so on. Next is the invoice date. If you have an invoice from the supplier, enter the actual invoice date. If you do not have an invoice, again, for instance, if you're paying honoraria, processing a refund, reimbursement, paying for visa fees, and so on, enter the date you are preparing the payment request form. If you need the attachments to also be sent to the supplier, select Yes within the Attach the Check Required section. One thing to keep in mind is that if the payment is being sent to the supplier via EFT, the attachments cannot be sent. If for some reason you need to override the pay method for the supplier, you can do so within this section. Select Check if the payment method is EFT in the supplier database, also known as the vendor profile, but the payment should be issued as a check. If you're processing a wire transfer, select Wire if the payment needs to be made via a wire transfer. You'll still have to follow the accounts payable wire transfer process. If you need a message printed on the check, you can enter that information in the payment message section. Enter the messages that must be printed on the check stub or EFT remittance advice. If there is a legitimate business need to have a check held for pickup, this is where you'll enter the full name and phone number of the staff member to be contacted when the check is available. Accounts payable will evaluate all requests to hold a check for pickup and may contact the requester for review. If it is determined that there is not a legitimate business need to hold the check for pickup, the requester, in other words the shopper, or whoever filled out the form, will be notified and the check will be mailed to the address on file. The withholding information section will be completed by accounts payable if needed, so you could go ahead and leave this section as is. That concludes going over the payment request form section in this webinar. Now let's go over available BearBuy resources and support. We have developed a payment request form job aid. The URL to where that job aid is hosted is listed in front of you. So the payment request form job aid will be within the forms section of that web page. We also have our BearBuy YouTube channel. There, we host all our functional demos that we've recorded to date. The URL to our YouTube channel is listed in front of you. If you have any additional questions, please contact the BearBuy Help Desk. Their phone number, hours of operation, and email address is listed in front of you. Thanks for watching.